All right, well, good evening. I think it's right at 7 o'clock, so we'll get started. Thank you for those of you that have signed on already. My name is Deanna McDaniel, and I'm going to be one of the presenters this evening, along with Sarah Kuntz, who's also going to be presenting. And we're going to talk about the fall semester. I know it's already kind of started for a lot of collegiates. We're already about 3-4 weeks into our curriculum, but we thought we'd just get started with some discussion points about what you need to remember as GCDs. And if there's any new GCDs out there joining us, certainly this will be a great opportunity for you to learn what your role will entail this fall. And then we'll definitely not take the full hour. And so at the end, we'll allow for questions. If you do have questions throughout, feel free to go ahead and type them in the question box. I'll try to field those questions while Sarah is talking, and then even one myself, I'll try to keep an eye out for that. You can also raise your hand under the attendee button. You can just push a little hand button sign, and if you want to raise your hand, then I can try to unmute you. And then that way, if you have a specific question and you have a microphone, then you can go ahead and speak as well. But anyway, my name is Deanna, as I said, and I'm one of the GCDs at the Delta Zeta chapter at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. And I help co-chair the GCD Training Coalition with Sarah. And this is a new coalition that we started, or that was started by the Grand Regent and Executive Council last fall. And we've had a few webinars. I think this is our third installment. And so anyway, with that, I'll let Sarah introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Kuntz. I am a co-GCD at Zeta Mu chapter in Springfield, Missouri. Just recently made a move back to Indiana, so I am now attempting the long distance GCD. So we'll see how this is going to go. I'm only a few months into this, and now that the school semester started back up, this should be an interesting experience. So kind of some of our objectives for today.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm hoping it works. Oh, there it goes.
Oh, there we go. So we're just going to run real quick through the important deadlines for this fall semester, certain dates to keep in mind, identify the resources available to the GCDs for assisting their chapter in completing the fall semester requirements. And the biggest portion of this presentation is just going to be discussing the GCD responsibilities in regards to pledging. So for completeness sake, some of these slides are probably going to be familiar if you've seen any of our other webinars or presentations. We like to continue to include these references in our presentations just so they're easy for you to find. So this would be the link to the GCD manual found on the CAPSI website. So that should be a main reference for you if there's ever any questions.
Sorry, Sarah, there's a little lag.
Okay. So also for completeness sake, we've included correspondence information for the central office, including just their phone number, office hours, email, which is probably going to be the best way to try to communicate with the central office if you have any questions. And there's also a link there to the executive officer emails as well. So just a kind of brief overview, general expectations for the GCDs, which we have gone over this before, but just to kind of reiterate, GCDs need to communicate with their chapter's executive committee regarding all activities. This semester it's going to pertain mainly to pledge and initiation activities, but this would apply throughout the year. GCD should try to attend general chapter and executive committee meetings and either help plan or stay informed of the agendas for those meetings and know what your chapter is working on and what is being discussed. GCD should try to attend chapter events and also encourage CAPSI faculty and local graduate brothers to attend as well. And if at all possible, you should try to attend province meetings and certainly encourage collegiate attendance. So this is probably one of the most exciting slides. It's going to be our fall deadlines. So there are really three big dates that you need to remember. October 1st, which I have a feeling is going to come up for a lot of us sooner than we anticipate. Feels like this semester is already going pretty quick. So October 1st is going to be the first mass article that's going to be due for the semester. And then October 15th is really the big date to remember. That's when your Grand Council dues are due into central office, and rosters have to be submitted for active collegiate brothers, officers, and faculty. That's also the deadline for the GCD verification form, which needs to be submitted annually or within 30 days of election if you are a new GCD that was just elected. And then there's December 1st, which also has a mask article due. And then the winter graduate roster is also due on December 1st. And that's if you do happen to have anyone that would be graduating in December.
And Sarah, there was actually Gary Van Riper, who's on the call, did make good notice here that the chapter rosters and dues invoices were sent out by the central office today to your collegiate email. So I know as a GCD of Delta Zeta, I get those emails as well. But if you don't get those emails and you kind of wait, I guess wait for your treasurer to let you know, they should have those. So make sure to check with them this week to make sure they receive those invoices. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for throwing that in there. Since I'm not a faculty and I'm co-GCD, I do not have access to that. So that's good to know that actually got sent out today. All right, so when it comes to the GCD verification forms, those have to be completed by the GCD. Also, if you're a co-GCD, so if you are not faculty or if you're a faculty advisor, those need to be filled out, signed by the school and the dean or the dean of the school, and then obviously submit those annually by October 15th. Or if your chapter happens to hold elections at the beginning of a semester, then those have to be sent in within 30 days of being elected. And just a reminder that each time your chapter elects officers, the GCD should also be elected or re-elected. And then those just have to be submitted to central office as well as the GCD committee chairs. So rosters, as I mentioned before, are due to central office by October 15th. So that is for all of your active collegiate brothers as well as officers and Kappa Psi faculty. You really need to make sure that your chapter has the most accurate, up-to-date membership roster, because that is what their dues are going to be billed on. So make sure that you're going through each semester and taking off those brothers that may have graduated or are no longer active in your program. And just make sure you have the most accurate list, because if you miss one semester, then you can find out a year or two down the road that you're getting billed for people that have long gone. So just keep that. All right, so as Deanna mentioned, invoices for dues are sent out from central office, and obviously those came out today. They have to be paid by October 15th. It is really nice that it is convenient where it can be paid online. We did include a link to that website on there. And as I mentioned before, double check your roster with the invoice to make sure that what central office has on file matches your records as well. And for those chapters that would have graduating brothers in the fall, I know this is probably not a common occurrence, but wanted to include this in here since there is a chance that you could have someone graduating during the middle of the year. So December 1st is when those are due. There's also a link there to the graduate referral form, as well as information on voluntary dues. And then also just try to reinforce to those graduating brothers that Kappa Psi is for life. I know that if they're graduating in the middle of the year, they may not have as big of a, as big of a graduation celebration as maybe everyone else who would be graduating in the spring. So just make sure that they don't get lost in the shuffle for those few graduates who may be graduating in the middle of the year. Also, for completeness sake, we included information on the graduation ritual and the link to order the graduation cords and medallions if that is something your chapter wishes to do. And last but not least on this part, we have, as far as deadlines, the last deadline is going to be December 1st, which is going to be your MASC official publication. As I mentioned, that's going to be, the first one's going to be due October 1st, and then the last one for the semester is December 1st. Make sure that you're reviewing your chapter submission to make sure that it complies with all of our picture and social media policies, and the chapter should be submitting those quarterly, and try to include a picture with your article if you can. It's really nice to be able to not only read what the chapters are doing, but also see the brothers in action. And then just note that the central office sends the copies of the GCD to the GCD of the MASC based on the chapter roster. So yet another reason to make sure your roster is correct. And do remember that there is a lag time of about 3 months from submission to publication. So if you're going to be looking over your chapter's article, just make sure that if they're wanting to publicize anything, that it's not something that's going to happen within that 3-month time frame before it's even published. And I think at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Deanna.
All right, as my slide advances, there's like a little delay here as we're getting forward. Okay, so really the bulk of this talk or webinar today will be kind of focused on the pledging process. Certainly, I know there are chapters that pledge in the spring semester, either as their only pledge time or do the fall and the spring. But, you know, after polling chapters previously in other surveys, we've learned that most of the pledging does happen in the fall. So we felt it fit best during this webinar. So really what we wanted to talk about is just how do we go about the pledging process in a safe and effective way as a GCD. And if you hopefully saw either on Facebook or even through email and on the fraternal listserv, I did put out there a pledging basics or kind of a GCD pledging basics handout that the GCD Coalition put together. And a lot of that handout actually is now replicated on these slides. So if you haven't had the chance to look at that handout, great, you'll learn some new things here tonight. And if you have, it'll just be a review of what was on that handout. But really that was put together as and approved by the Executive Council, primarily because pledging is integral to the success of our fraternity. Obviously, we can't be a successful fraternity until we get new members every year. And so that's a very important process. But it probably also carries the most risk for the fraternity. And so I know the Executive Council over the years has struggled with certain chapters, maybe not following the guidelines or not following the rules. And it just takes one pledge or one chapter to kind of do something that they shouldn't do that could make a bad name for the whole fraternity. And so we're really trying hard to ensure that the pledging process goes seamlessly. So as we know, the pledging process is all about learning the rituals, the history and ideals of the chapter, and it further can strengthen the commitment and appreciation for the fraternity. And so pledges really should be prepared to work hard. And every one thing I've learned just as being a GCD for about 13 years here and talking to other, I'm sorry, actually 15 years, but and talking to other GCDs, you know, it seems like every chapter does their rushing and pledging process just a little differently in regards to how long the process is, maybe how in depth or how difficult it is, I guess, to even get a bid, to start the pledging process, etc. But the goal ultimately is that whatever your chapter is doing, that you know that you can say at the end of the day that you worked hard and made sure that the pledges that we are now going to let cross into the full brothers are well prepared and know the history and ideals of the chapter. And because there is a really sensitive nature in a relationship between a rush or rushian or pledge and the members of any fraternity, whether it be a social fraternity or a professional fraternity, it's extremely important that we do follow those fraternal risk management policies. And I put bold here, but GCDs really are integral to the success of safe and effective pledging processes. I think we are the ones to kind of ask those questions and be able to say, well, what do you think? Could this be construed as hazing? Or is this something that you would want to have done to you? And sometimes it's like, no, we've just done this as a chapter for 20, 30 years. And that might have been okay 30 years ago, or might not have been as concerning, but now, and just the sensitive nature in the landscape of the world now, we just have to take everything with a mindful eye. So some responsibilities then of the GCD, I think, is just really be aware of all rush and all initiation and pledging events that are going on. So specifically, for example, with Delta Zeta, we just finished our rush process. Our last rush event was last week. We voted on the people that we were going to put bids out to on Thursday night, and the bids went out on Friday for them to accept, and then we pledge pin actually tomorrow. So our process is almost nearly done, but I was made sure that I knew of every rush event. I actually was able to attend. We have 5, and I unfortunately was not able to attend one, but I attended 4 of the 5 rush events. I'll be at pledge pinning. I was at the pledge bid process, and definitely am going to plan to be at the initiation. Now, with that said, I know that not every GCD can do that. Sarah, I know you're an example. You're distance GCD, but ultimately, at least if anything, the GCD should be aware of the events and understand what's going to happen, review those activities planned in advance to make sure they're abiding by the risk management policy. And really, for every event your chapter hosts, regardless if it's pledging or fundraising or professional relations or social or whatever, they really should be filling out a risk assessment form. So these forms were started, gosh, Sarah, I don't remember. It was like at least 2 years ago, possibly even 3. And I'm sorry, I should know that, but they started, and it's one of those forms that once you start filling them out, and the chairs and the executive committee know what to fill out on them, they don't take that long to review. But what I do at my chapter is that on Wednesdays, my risk management chair will send me all of the forms that she has received on Wednesday, and then I'm supposed to review and approve them by Friday. And all it does is just make sure that I know the event that's going on, and these are for any future events that are coming up in the next week. And so that by me looking at those, I know what the event is going to be, but 2, what have they done a risk assessment, and do we feel that it's a favorable risk to do the event? And then those forms are kept on file as well at the chapter. In addition, you should have a risk management committee or chair. That's part of the bylaws. And so there are acknowledgement forms that all pledges need to sign. So once they have been given a bid to pledge, they should fill out a risk management form. And then those forms are kept on file. And we'll talk about the P cards, but it's really important you have not only them fill out P cards, but an internal roster so you know what pledges you have as part of your chapter. And part of this came up actually at GCC, and I just reached out to the executive council this week as well, knowing that we were giving this webinar to confirm this. But one of the thoughts they said was, if you have your pledges pay a small fee at the beginning of pledging to the chapter, and you can have an invoice saying that they paid it. What could happen is, if anything were to happen at your chapter that did violate risk management or could be concerned of risk management, your chapter or those pledges would now be covered because they have paid into the chapter, and you have an official roster. So they're basically an official recognized member, or I should say Rushy or pledge of Kappa Psi. That doesn't mean that they're safe and that the chapter is safe, because obviously our liability insurance would do a review, and if there was anything felt that they did something wrong, then obviously it wouldn't necessarily be covered. The chapter still could be liable, but at least in this way you have an official way. So what we've done at Delta Zeta is the first day of their first meeting, we accept $5 from each pledge. And then if they end up passing or crossing, then we'll just take off that $5 from the dues that they are need to pay at the end of the pledge process, or as an initiate, a new initiate. If they end up that we don't end up giving them, I guess we decide not to initiate them, then that $5 would go back to them. So it'd be refunded back to the pledge. So that's just something to think about at your chapter. Certainly it's not a requirement to do that, but I think just in general, it made me feel a little safer to do that. And so that's what we've done at our chapter. Sarah, do you know if you've done anything similar at your chapter?
I believe that they do have them pay a small fee up front. And that's mainly because being a fairly new chapter, they don't have a lot when it comes to funds. So by asking the pledges to give a little bit of money up front, they can help use that for some of the pledge activities.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
So I think that's mainly what they use that for, but then they also, of course, take that out of their initial dues.
And another thing that was mentioned by, I think, Grand Counselor Milton, and made a comment that, you know, for example, $5 is what we have. Well, I think it costs $5 to buy a pledge manual or pledge book, handbook for the pledges. So that could be kind of their fee towards getting that pledge handbook that every pledge should have anyway. So that kind of what you said, Sarah, that's nice, because then the chapter doesn't have to be out that money up front. That would be something that we could basically use that money towards. And so then the other thing is that we need to make sure that all your officers know the Constitution and the ritual procedures regarding the pledging and initiation. All pledges should have a pledge pen, an official pledge pen. I mentioned the P cards. So the P cards, if you are very similar to the M cards, again, the M cards are your membership cards, but the P cards would be a pledge card. They're also called like a Form P or a pledge form. And you can find them online, and they're kept on file with a P card archive that your chapter would have. But again, you don't need to send these into the central office. I know some chapters have sent a roster to the central office. I don't think that would ever hurt, but I know the central office doesn't necessarily require or even necessarily suggest that you send that in. But if you wanted to CC or send like a roster into, not the P cards, but like a roster into the central office, I think that would be fine. And then of course the M cards are done at the time of initiation. And then, as I already mentioned, but all pledges will sign that risk management acknowledgement form. When they do cross, it's important that the chapter and the GCD or GCD sends to the central office within 7 days. So it's a pretty tight time frame, but it's important that they get a new membership roster typed and emailed up to them, including the new members, those M cards, which are submitted online, and then those initiation fees for each new brother. After the invoice for dues is received. So that the invoice usually doesn't happen within 7 days because they don't know how many you're going to initiate. But what they will do is they would make sure that the initiation fees, they'll get your roster, and then you need to make sure that you have those signed in. And then while I was looking here, there's a few questions, so I apologize. Let me get back to those. It's really difficult to see this. Let me see. Oh, we've had lots of questions here. So actually, I'm glad that I'm going to pause for a moment and look at these questions and try to answer them. So a couple things that were just asked or just statements that I'll go ahead and read here is mentioning that the GCD committee has actually received a number of those GCD verification forms. So this kind of goes back to what Sarah was talking about. And so in order to be covered under the Capacity liability policy, it really is important that you have a current verification form on file with the central office. So obviously you still have until October 15th, but make sure you get those in. So that was just a reminder by Brother Van Riper. There was another question about the length of pledging. depending on the chapter. And the chapter they advised was that there's an impression that pledging is required to be at least 8 weeks long. Is that correct? And, you know, Brother Reno, I think that is actually, I don't know. I'd have to look that up, to be honest, and whether or not that's a requirement or if that's in the bylaws anywhere. I know that's what ours is. It's at least 8 weeks. And I feel like that might be because there might be a policy on that. I know there's, I think, a certain number of meetings that you must have or something. But why don't I look into that, and we can always, if anyone else happens to know the exact answer in that, they could speak out here. I don't know if Sarah, you know that. I should know that, but I don't. I'm not remembering right now. So we could look that up. And then one last question that just came in was that Grand Regent Mancini would like that all risk management forms for Russian pledge events are signed by the GCVs and co-GCVs. So he's just remembering, you know, reminding us to say that, and that is absolutely important, is that we are, all GCVs are seeing those rush and pledge event forms and signing those. So hopefully that summarizes the questions. And we can certainly dig a little bit further in regards to the length of pledging. But I do believe 8 weeks there is something about 8 weeks. Sarah, do you know?
I'm going to see if I can try to find an answer.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So
You can do my investigative work. Okay. All right. So just some keys to pledging success is, I think important is just explaining the expectations and requirements up front to the pledge class. So some of the things that have probably been, I guess, a question for me as a GCD, or things that have come up from my chaplain and my pledge trainers, have been when the pledges are trying to scooch out of requirements or something, saying that wasn't an expectation set up front. And so we try to go over those expectations probably 10 or 15 different times. Remember what you're going to be expected to do, even prior to, frankly, the bid that we give them, because if they're not going to be willing or able to come to all of our pledge meetings, that's a requirement for us, then unfortunately, we should not give them a bid, because we have to make sure that they come to all of them. It isn't important to balance between a quantity versus quality in the size class. I will tell you, this year for Delta Zeta, we have, I think, 32, which I think is a fabulous number. We had a few years back, I'll admit, we had a 66 class, and that was the biggest I've had in my tenure as GCD in 15 years. And we did still follow the same process that we currently do, and we made sure that all of them met the criteria, and they certainly all did. But let's face it, we know that of that, any number you have of your pledge class, there's still going to be an X% that end up, you know, maybe not meeting all as an active brother, don't come to all the events, don't do the things they're supposed to do. And so it's important that we make sure that when we are allowing people to cross and be active, that we do have a quality process in place. And so I think that's important. I actually like a smaller class. I think it makes it more intimate, and you can really get to know the pledges better. Incorporate your brothers during pledging. So for example, we invite all of our executive committee members to attend pledge meetings. They don't have to go to all of them, but they have to go to at least one. We also allow actives to go to pledge meetings, but we also do a midpoint interview for all of our pledges to kind of get at the heart of how things are going. We utilize rubrics in an objective way to try to help tease out some of those finite details between different pledges, and we use our active brothers to help in those interviews, which has been really helpful as a successful event for us. It's important to implement community service into the pledging process, because I think that's community service and philanthropy is definitely a part of our fraternity. And so, for example, Reach Out to Read, our national philanthropy event, you know, having some form of having the pledges involved in that process is a great opportunity. I know some different chapters across the way even do that as part of the rush, which I think is outstanding. You know, I know a chapter, Beta Chi, I can speak to in Des Moines. I know they were doing something with Reach Out to Read, and some other, I think Ronald McDonald House is part of a rush event even. So I think that's an outstanding opportunity to just already start to show the cool things that we do as a fraternity. And then just have a process for dismissing pledges if they don't fulfill established requirements. So, I know for ours is at midpoint, they have to be achieving certain percentages, passing percentages on all their weekly quizzes. We also have a final exam at the end that is a high stakes. They have to achieve, I believe it's 70 to 80%, I can't recall exactly, but and if they don't, they're out, even if they've done a great job throughout the pledging process. So we make sure that we have kind of like high stakes and low stakes things throughout, but whatever works for you. And I'd love to hear it at the end when we open it up to kind of questions, if people want to, if you're able to either type in what you've done or even have some best practices, we'd love to hear those. And then it's important to emphasize the importance of having graduates and graduate chapters involved, especially in all the professional pledging events. So, if, for example, here in Iowa, we have a great, we have an Iowa grad chapter, and I know out there, everybody, a lot of states, if not all states, have at least a graduate chapter either locally or within the state. That certainly even just inviting those graduates, if they're able to come, say to initiation or even to some of the rush events, just shows how important Kappa Psi is, not only as a collegiate, but as a graduate as well. So I think that's been a successful thing that certain chapters have done. It's also extremely important to maintain a level of professionalism and respect between all members and the potential members. So obviously we want to make sure all principles of human dignity are upheld. Potential members are expected to have the highest regard for the virtues of our fraternity, and so at all times. And so that in order to be considered a member, we need to make sure that they're going to uphold those virtues as an active brother. As we all know, being a brother is for life, so it's important that we are kind of teasing that out right away at the beginning. And we really, there is a special emphasis on sobriety and high ideals for both during and outside of fraternal events and activities. That's an extremely important point here, and we'll kind of talk at the next slide about a little bit more about that. So what shouldn't happen is any reckless or illegal behavior, obviously, or any conduct that could be considered unbecoming of a brother. That is never condoned or allowed at all. And members must refrain from anything that any reasonable person that would look upon that situation and they could perceive it as an encouraging or coercing any member of drinking alcohol or using a mind-altering substance. That is absolutely should not be done. And I think we all know that, that's important, but those are the types of things that certainly can happen. And we need to make sure we, as GCDs, are reminding people, hey, this cannot happen. And so a couple years ago when the new risk management policies came out, one of the biggest statements and kind of the newest thing that came out, and this is now, I think actually, yeah, maybe 2 to 3 years ago, or maybe even 4, is that all potential members of pledges cannot consume any alcohol or obviously mind-altering substance for non-medical purposes before, during, or immediately following any fraternity event or on chapter premises. And so, basically an extremely, there's no tolerance. So even if, for example, you hold a rush event, say at a local restaurant, if there is alcohol served at that restaurant, that's one thing, but no one should be drinking alcohol, no pledge, no active, at all during that. And that's an extremely important point. So hopefully this is not a new policy. This has certainly been in place for a few years now, but it's an important one that we just have to remind our pledges about. And some other what not to do statements here, just obviously we already talked about illegal activities that are against the rule of the academic institution, any forced physical exercise or potential physical harm, even any potential embarrassment or psychological harm. This is something even a few years back, it's like even doing like having someone do a chicken dance or something like that, making them do a dance in front of other people. Other chapters were, I've heard of chapters doing that, and that's something that could cause that pledge to feel embarrassed or feel psychologically harmed. And so even doing things like that really should not happen. Anything that would degrade their dignity, their moral or religious beliefs. Of course, anything that requires an unreasonable amount of time. And that's a hard, something, because I know like sometimes initiation can take 3-4 hours, but it's really an important thing that it's not an unreasonable amount of time, that the pledge is well known in advance what their time commitment might be. You should never require them to consume food or liquid during an activity. It can be available, obviously, but you shouldn't require it. And then just drinking alcohol formally or informally or really at any time should not be done. And so if you were curious about what all these risk management policies that I'm talking about, it was 2016 when they were updated. The slides I think are smart here. We can click on the links. Otherwise, they're on our new website. There's that risk management knowledge form, which I already mentioned to you guys. The activity risk assessment forms, I think we've drove those home here. Of course, there's alcohol and substance abuse procedures, as well as what to do if there is a policy violation. And so, for example, if they're in the policy violations could be anything construed from a mild, moderate, or severe violation. And each process, if it's a mild violation, what would happen from that, or what rules or regulations would you follow? The GCDs are integral in each of those, so it's really important that you review that as a GCD on what you would be responsible for in any of those violations. And again, like I said, they're on the website. This slide just goes on to just, again, that risk management policy. It specifically calls out alcohol and substance abuse, hazing, human dignity, and then there is a whole section on rushing and pledging. So again, a lot of that is really covered here, but certainly go out and check it out. And then there is a picture and social media policy. We always just bring that up because that's an important thing as you're going through these events, that your collegiates are following the picture policy out there by the fraternity. And then liability. I do want to bring this up. So this is a couple new slides here. And this is important because when we take this role, or when we're elected into this position as a GCD, we are taking a liability, certainly. And so that's why it's important that we're so engaged at the chapter, because we are liable for all of the events that the chapter puts on. And so we really, as we already have said, we really need to be aware of all of those events that occur. And that one way of doing that is by being just active with your executive council, knowing the chairs and each of the executive committee members, knowing what events they're going to plan in advance, maybe even having some say in what they plan, or encouraging certain things to be done or not to be done, getting those risk assessment forms. But all officially recognized GCDs, and when I say official, that's what Brother Van Riper was talking about, is those GCD verification forms. So if you have not filled out a verification form and your dean has not signed it at the college, then you are not technically a recognized GCD. But only the recognized GCDs will be protected under the fraternity's liability insurance. And there is no such thing as an unofficial event or an unofficial GCD. And I say that because there are some chapters that utilize that terminology. They say, well, we have 2 GCDs, but we kind of unofficially have another, a third or a fourth GCD. And that term just does not exist, and we really shouldn't do that. If there might be a reason that you want to name them a GCD, but frankly, if they aren't willing to take that liability and are not willing to be an official GCD, then maybe in your bylaws you come up with a new term for them, and don't call it an SL GCD, but call it something else, maybe like an alumni or a liaison or something. But they still would not be covered under the liability insurance. And so it's important that if you have appropriate GCD oversight, then risk is minimized. It's kind of scary when you think about everything that your chapter is doing, and you think about the broad aspects that our chapters do, and how we could be liable for all of that. But again, if you are appropriate oversight, then you really should have minimal risk, ultimately. And so again, I think this is the 10th time I've said it, but just make sure you look at those risk assessment forms for all events and sign off on them so that you know what's going on. And so just another statement that the Grand Counselor, our Grand Counselor Milton and Grand Regent Mancini wanted us to say here was that GCDs are held professionally and personally responsible for all those activities. And if they violate federal, state, or local laws or policies and procedures of fraternity, that GCD will be held responsible. Again, our insurance carrier does provide general liability policies to pay those damages if damages need to be paid, but it doesn't necessarily defend or provide coverage to any specific chapter member when the fraternity policy is violated. If after review the policy wasn't violated, it was an unfound charge, then we would be covered. But if there is any chance that we were, and we, when I say we, meaning as a chapter, that we did maybe not follow the policies of the fraternity, then we could be liable. So with that gloomy statement there, I guess I wanted to just, our last slide here is just some contact information, but I certainly want to just say it is important that, though that's a heavy topic and we are talking about liability and how important, I think it's just so important we know that, and so we don't go in blind, because when we accept that election or that nomination to serve as GCD, we do it with such, I guess, heart and soul that we want to do this for the chapter. So I know I'm speaking to the crowd because everybody that signed on today obviously cares enough to be here, to be a great GCD. And it can be, frankly, a little bit intimidating to know that you have such liability. But again, if you are a close member of your chapter and you keep involved, keep engaged, even if it's from a distance like you, Sarah, I think the important point is that you can do a great job as a GCD. You just have to have oversight. And there is a balance between hovering and hand-holding to allowing some independence, but it's extremely important that they should never keep anything from you, because if they're keeping it from you, then likely it shouldn't be done. So if you have a great relationship with your collegiates, you should be, your GCD job should be smooth and seamless and rewarding. And that's why we do this, right? Is because it's a rewarding experience. So. So there's our contact information. I realize there's a statement in here, but it's important that all GCDs too, we want you to know how to contact us. It's important to go to province assemblies. It shouldn't say conclaves there, but just assemblies, as well as go to GCC. That's a way to network with GCDs. I know the next GCC is going to be held in Washington, D.C., so that's going to be a great place. I'm excited to be there myself. We do have a GCD Google group, so if you haven't signed up for that, certainly you can find the link there, as well as a GCD Facebook group. And then, of course, the International GCD Development Committee, as well as the GCD Training Coalition, we are available as resources to all GCDs. So if there's ever a question that you have, you can always reach out to us. And it looks like there is a few more questions that I'm going to field here as well. Actually, when I get to the last slide. But let me field a few of these questions, and then let's see. Sorry, there's some questions that came in. So one of the questions was, when individuals are offered a bid to become a pledge, or when pledges complete pledge training and undergo initiation, who actually constitutes the vote into membership? So I believe that would be your active members. So not including the pledges or the initiates, but what that would mean would be people, your current active member roster would count towards that. And because it is a vote of that requires a quorum, and I believe it's 2/3 quorum, if I'm not mistaken. I'm certain it's 2/3 quorum. So you would need to make sure you have quorum available to vote on who is going to initiate. That's my take on that, or not 2/3, maybe it's 3/4. Oh gosh, I feel bad. So this question was specifically related to APPE students out on rotations for membership. What do you do? what do you do for that? And I believe actually now it is three, it is 3/4. I'd have to pull up the manual again. I can never remember the different the different quorums. I always have to look it up before an event, but I'm almost certain it is either 2/3 or 3/4 quorum. And the question about APPEs, actually, so if within your own chapter's bylaws, for example, at Delta Zeta, that was an allowance that we talked about at GCC a few years back, was that we could put a clause in our own bylaws that specifically states that APPE members would not be counted against quorum if they're not able to attend. Because we have the same issue at Delta Zeta, as do many chapters, is when they go out on their rotations, it's going to be difficult to get them in. So really the quorum would be of the people in, if you have it in your bylaws, a statement that they're not counted towards quorum, then you can basically not count them against your quorum. I hope that answers your question, Bruce. If it doesn't, certainly try to type out another question. Another question that came in was no alcohol immediately after an event. So let's say there's a dinner and a few brothers of legal age decide to go to Joe's Bar and Grill afterwards. What is the time frame? I wish I knew the answer to this. This is something that has come up and it's been very difficult. So, you know, they have that terminology about immediately following. And, you know, this question has come up because let's say brothers live together with a pledge. Maybe it's somebody that lives at their house and they, you know, attended a rush event, then they went back to their apartment where they both live and they have alcohol there. I think if you, again, just use your judgment, common sense. If they're adults and of legal age and they're not doing it under a Kappa Psi event, or they're not planning to go out drinking during the Kappa Psi event or because it's a post Kappa Psi event, then I think it's probably fine. But that would be one of those gray areas. That's I wish and that might be a good question if that scenario is maybe coming up, is maybe to reach out to Grand Counselor Milton to see what his take would be on that, because I know that is something that has come up before, and that was the answer I was given. It's just kind of use your common sense on that. And then another question came up is, if you're not on Facebook, what do we do if all the information's on Facebook? So share it on Facebook. So to just answer that question, we try to make sure that all of the information we share is not just on Facebook, but also through the Google group, through the email, as well as through the Facebook or through the Kappa Psi listserv. If it's specific to GCD, sometimes it just goes out to that Google group. And if you don't know how to sign in or you don't have access to that Google group, we can get you the link to that. It's on the slide set. If you click on that, the Google group is on there. Otherwise, I can just tell you here once I get it pulled up what the actual email address is. And you can just send an email either to myself or to Gary Van Riper, who's co-chair of the GCD Development Committee, and then they can get you signed up to the Google group as well. And then as far as copy of the slides, so the slides are actually on the website. That question came up here. The slides are out there on the website. Underneath the GCD page, we have our own GCD page now on the website, which is fabulous. Brother Stan has been awesome getting our website up to date. And so all these slides to be out there. I also sent the slides out in the, I think either through the fraternity listserv as well through the GCD Google group. A few more things have been coming on here. And I thank you, Bruce. You put in here 3/4 of members have to be there. Even APPs must vote yes. But I think to answer that, Bruce, and maybe this is something we can talk offline, or we can reach out to Dr. Milton. If you have it in your bylaws, they don't have to be counted towards quorum. It's okay. So yes, that's my understanding, and we've gotten our bylaws approved through the legislative committee as such with that statement in there. And I know a lot of other chapters did, because this discussion came up a lot at GCC a few years ago about APBE students and how do we handle quorum when they're not around.
Hey, Deanna, I just
Yeah.
wanted to let you know I had pulled up the Constitution and bylaws, and actually in the collegiate bylaws, it says chapters may elect to increase the requirement for quorum or exclude members on clinical rotations if specified in their bylaws.
Okay.
If specified, members on clinical rotation shall be permitted to vote as part of any required quorum if in good standing, but their absence will not count against quorum. So that's from the chapter
Perfect.
bylaw.
And now that you say that, I think, 2 years ago, not the last GCC, but the one before that, it was discussed at length. And it was if you put in your bylaws, and then they added that statement, if I'm not mistaken, at the last GCC that gave you a kind of that option. Because that's certainly what we do at Delta Zeta. If we have opportunities for them, we do an online meeting. We Skype our meetings for only the people that are on rotation, and so they can do a Skype in, and we do a virtual vote. We do that for elections, but also too for the initiation bids, and so they can count into our quorum if they want, but they won't count against it if they don't join into the meeting. And then there was just another question about what any recommendations we have for GCDs who do not have a social media presence to manage traffic posting on Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat. And that is a great question. So what I would suggest in that regard, if you yourself are not on social media, is at your chapter, for example, Delta Zeta, we have a webmaster position. That webmaster position not only helps with our website, but they also are kind of our social media presence and help with the communication we have out to social media. But in that role, one of the charges to them is that they ensure that everything going out is appropriate. Now you are putting your faith then in a student's hand, but hopefully because they've been elected into that position from the chapter and they've kind of taken the oath that they will abide by the role of that position, they should hopefully be doing that and come to you with if they see anything that could be considered concerning. And this happened even at Delta Zeta, and it wasn't even it was an example of a picture taken. It was at a bar and we were not drinking, but in the background of the bar was one of those neon signs that said like Bud Light or one of those. And so it looked as though, hey, you're in this establishment, you're advertising alcohol. The brothers in the picture were not. And so that was an example where actually was our historian that happened to see it and pulled it down and asked me, hey, should I pull this down? I said, absolutely. And, or we can crop the picture so all that's out of there. But yeah, those are some things that I would probably suggest. Maybe if anybody else has suggestions, I'd be happy to unmute some people if I'm able and you want to raise your hand and or type out things that you've done here. I know we have only about 7 minutes left, but and then Sarah, did you find anything about that question?
Yes. So I
About
had to
the
do about the length of the pledging
length
process.
of pledging?
So I did a little bit of digging, and it doesn't say anywhere specifically in regards to just year-to-year pledging process, but as I was looking at the instructions for chartering, they actually recommend, it says, due to the requirements involved in the pledge process, it's recommended that the pledge process be no fewer than 6 to 8 weeks, unless otherwise mandated by the school. So that's when it comes to chartering a new chapter, but I feel like that we can extrapolate that to our regular pledging process.
Great. So hopefully that answers your question, Jessica, if you're still on. Yeah, because I remember thinking something along those lines, but not seeing that officially within the.
Yeah, it's not in the Constitution and bylaws, it's just in the policy manual when it comes to chartering a new chapter.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm glad you were able to do the investigative work while I was talking. Does anybody else have any last minute questions? I'm looking at the chat box right now, seeing if there's anything. And I so appreciate all of these questions that have been asked. It really helps us guide our discussion. I know though I wasn't able to answer them all perfectly the first time, at least with some dueling help here between Sarah and myself, we can get the answers. And of course, certainly, if you have any questions you just didn't want to ask it online here, we are available to you, as well as the GCD Development Committee. And we would love to be available to help you out in any way, shape, or form that you need. And so I'll just leave it open for one more minute to see if anybody has any additional questions. And while I'm doing that, I was going to try to find the GCD email. I was just going to tell you how, if you wanted to get on the Google group. So I don't know if I can type it out to everybody. I don't know if that would work or not, or I could just say it out loud. So if you were interested in joining the group, it's just HTTPS, //groups.google.com, and then it's a /D, I guess, /forum /kappa -psi -grand -council -duties or deputies, I'm sorry. So that's how to visit the group, and then you can request access. And I'll see if I can type that. I don't know if I can type that in somewhere out to the chat box, if that works or not. But that's what you would join up if you're not on social media, and that's okay. Like I said, we never just put anything out just on Facebook solely, because we know there are people out there that don't have access to or aren't on Facebook. For example, my husband, he refuses it. So I know there are people out there that do, so that's okay. And we never want to exclude anybody. So I'll see if I can put this in the chat box here, and that'll help. And then another question was, the links included in the slides are not able to be clicked on since we are viewing your screen. Oh, okay, Jessica, so that's a great point. I think though, if you actually go out to the slides on the PDF in the web, so on the website, when they're actually on the website, you should be able to go into the PDF, and I'm hoping those links will work because I converted it to a PDF. If you're finding they're not, let me know. Otherwise, the question was also, how do we get to the website? So that's great. And actually, maybe I can just show you here, since I'm still, since I'm sharing my screen. Can I do this, Sarah? I think I can, right?
You should be able to.
Are you guys able to see my browser here? Are you seeing my browser, Sarah? My web browser?
Yes.
Okay. So what I would just search is it's kappapsi.com now instead of kappapsi.org. That's the important. So they have switched now from kappapsi.org to kappapsi.com. And if you click on it here, if you go to the kappapsi.org site, still it'll route you to, you can still navigate a little bit through the site, but then it'll take you to the new website, which will look like this. You should see this beautiful shoreline. So that's our new site. If you scroll down in the right under resources here, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse out there, Sarah?
Yes.
Or not? Okay.
Yeah,
so if you do that, what'd you say?
Yeah, if you click on Grand Council Deputy, because I was just doing it along with you to make sure it worked. And then scroll down, and the presentation that we're at right now is the Pledging Basics. And if you click on the PowerPoint, it will pull up the PowerPoint, and the links do work. Perfect.
Thank you. But that is how you get to the GCD website.
Also on the bottom of that page, it did have links to all the Facebook and Google groups. So
yeah, oh yeah, thank you for reminding me of that, Sarah. Yeah, so this is, I forget how because now with the new website, it's so great. You can click right on here and just go right to the Google group, the Facebook, or the international the group for our Google group would be our entire fraternity, and then a GCD email would go to, I believe that goes to the GCD chairs of the development committee. So. But there's some forms here, the GCD forms, descriptions, the manual. So this page is great If you go back to the Brothers page, that's kind of the home page. This is where you can find like legislative tips, the disciplinary guide. I think we talked about risk management is in here, rushing and pledging. There's a whole section on that here too. So there's just a lot of great things. So I'd feel just definitely get on and just navigate this website, and then you'll learn that where everything is. And so hopefully with that, I know we're getting right at 8 o'clock here. I hope that this was you guys learned some things. And if you have any additional questions or you want to chat anytime, feel free to email us. And I'm even happy to talk via the phone too. So just let us know if you need anything. And again, thank you all for your time. I know it's a Sunday evening. My girls are outside probably causing my husband some havoc right now. So, but we appreciate it and have a great next week. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.